Good evening. We're here live in Dearborn at the ISPU offices, and my name is Colleen Ezzeddine. I'm a board member here at ISPU. And tonight we have a special treat. We're here with Khaled Beydoun, and he is actually an ISPU scholar. He's a Cal Berkeley School of Law visiting law professor. Maybe you've read his work in The Guardian, the New York Times. Maybe you follow him on Twitter. Maybe you've seen him on ESPN. We're very lucky to have him today, and I'm really excited for you to get to know him a little more, as he's going to be our keynote speaker at our banquet this September 30th. That's a Sunday. Tickets are now on sale, and we wanted to give you a sneak preview of what he's like and what he's about. Although I think a lot of you already know about Khaled. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks so much for having
joining
me.
us. You grew up in Detroit,
I did.
Fordson High School graduate.
Yeah.
And then you, after U of M, for undergrad, you moved out to LA, UCLA Law School.
Yep.
But you found yourself back here in Southeast Michigan. What drew you back here to Michigan?
Yeah, so this is my third return to Detroit since going to law school on the West Coast. What brought me back is this is home. It's always going to be home. I've always been, deeply invested in the social and racial justice work being done here. So the opportunity to come back and then, teach law in the backyard where I grew up was, an ideal situation that I couldn't turn down.
Wonderful. Well, we're certainly glad to have you back, and so glad that you can help us out at our banquet. And we're all going to be anxious to talk to you that night on Sunday, September 30th. You're a critical race theorist. What does that mean exactly?
Yeah, so critical race theory is, wonderfully what's happened in the last couple of years, especially with the emergence of the Black Lives Matter movement, is that it's sort of trickled down critical race theory into, popular social justice language. But critical race theory essentially is the idea that the law, legal systems, legal institutions are entirely invested in perpetuating racial inequality and white supremacy. And we see this very vividly, obviously, with the emergence of the Trump administration and, kind of the shift from the idea that America is post-racial now to the opposite side of the spectrum, when the White House and even the Supreme Court are explicitly engaged in what we can all agree is racist, xenophobic, and Islamophobic policy. Critical race theory emphasizes the importance that the law is central in spearheading racial inequality and racism.
Okay. And what drew you to a career in combating racism and anti-Muslim bigotry?
Yeah, growing up in this community, I think, I grew up on the outskirts, on the margins of Dearborn. In Detroit, I grew up in a low-income household, single-parent household. I saw how, just effects like the downturn, the decline of the public educational system had a deleterious impact on brown and black people. I saw how American foreign policy was ravaging countries in the Middle East, countries that my parents came from. I saw how individuals from poor, generally of color families, could not access adequate jobs, could not access, college, especially with the spike in college tuition. I saw how immigration policy was discriminatory, especially now with the expansion of the war on terror, that I was conditioned at a young age as an activist, and then I just naturally segued into a legal career.
Great. You actually wrote an article for the New York Times about poverty in the American Muslim communities across the country.
Yeah.
This is obviously something that resonated with you because of your background, and what have you learned since then about this and this problem?
So one of my primary, intellectual interests that I dedicate a lot of time in my scholarship is to highlight the idea that a significant percentage of Muslim Americans struggle with poverty or on the cusp of legal poverty. ISPU does a great job in highlighting how poverty is pervasive within the broader Muslim American community. I cite ISPU in the article itself. But it's more than just, the source is just more than personal experience or empathy. I'm somebody who would classify himself also as an intersectionalist. Intersectionality is a buzzword now in the American political parlance. So it's critical to show how living at this juncture of poverty and Muslim identity actually intensifies how poor Muslims experience the war on terror, especially during moments like Ramadan when surveillance intensifies, when informants are more ubiquitous in places like mosques. So I felt that I needed to address the idea that poverty and Muslim identity places poor Muslims in a very precarious position, and no more ideal opportunity than Ramadan to do that.
Yeah, that's why we were so glad that you're able to come speak to us at our event on September 30th. Your work is very relevant to the work that we do, and I know a lot of us out here are really looking forward to hearing from you at our event in September. But let's talk a little bit about your book, American Islamophobia. Came out in the spring. And why should people read your book? What's attractive? 14 schools are actually using this in their curriculum this fall. So people obviously want to read it.
Yeah.
What do you think is resonating with people?
Yeah, I think what's resonating about the book is that the book obviously, comes at a really opportune time where we're experiencing very frightening manifestations of Islamophobia from the governmental halls of power themselves. We see it with the Supreme Court upholding the Muslim ban. We see it with the kind of presidential rhetoric and policy that Trump is unleashing. And obviously because of the rise of Trump, Islamophobia has become a cornerstone social justice issue. People care about Muslim American civil rights in a way that they hadn't before. So the attention is there, the interest is there for Americans beyond the Muslim American experience to want to learn about Islamophobia in a serious way. And I'm somebody who has researched the war on terror and Islamophobia for many years. This book comes from, really hardened academic research. But it's also, interspersed with vignettes, personal stories, and so on. So I try to make it an accessible read. And I think that's why. It's an academic project, but it's also accessible, which has made it, God willing, a resonant read.
Yeah, definitely. If you're maybe a little taken aback when you think maybe it's an academic book, there's really some great narratives in there that really give us a glimpse of who you are and your upbringing, and just little things about where you were for 9/11 and different things. Really is a nice read, and I like that there's that personal story worked into it. Islamophobia in the U.S. today, in Michigan today. We got to talk about what's on everyone's mind. Just a couple days ago here in Michigan on Tuesday, we had a primary. And what do you think? What are your thoughts on what happened here in Michigan?
I think, I was on the ground. I was, part of many campaign efforts.
You were getting out the vote. You were driving and getting people to the polls.
I was driving a bus, getting, people without cars and, elderly folk, making sure they got to the polls. So it was really empowering to do that. But I think it was such a empowering moment to see not only a number of Muslims on the ballots, for posts as high as governor, U.S. House of Representatives, also state seats, but to see how the community really galvanized, right? So we're seeing a new crop of young activists, political strategists, leaders on the ground that really, maximize the Arab and the Muslim vote here locally in a way that hadn't been maximized before. And I kind of view that as being, Van Jones talked about how electing Trump was the white lash, right? He said that on CNN the day after Trump was elected. This was a Muslim lash to the Islamophobia coming from the White House, that Muslim candidates, Muslim voters were really, inspired to vote against an administration and then to propel their own politicians to respond to this threat coming from the White House, the Supreme Court, and so on.
And if you're interested in finding out more about your thoughts on the election, you have an article coming out tomorrow in The Guardian. You want to give us a little sneak preview about what you might read in that?
So the individual who was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, who was poised to be the first Palestinian and Muslim American congresswoman in the United States, that's a landmark moment. That's a really serious moment. And it's, I think, more of an even prouder moment given who Rashida Tlaib is. She's somebody who comes from Southwest Detroit, from many of the same circumstances I grew up with. She is a very hardened, bred social justice advocate. She's an organizer. So the fact that we have somebody who's Palestinian American, who's a social justice advocate, being the first person to represent Palestinians and Muslims in Washington, D.C., I think is a feather in all of our caps. So the piece is pretty much just kind of, celebrating, memorializing the importance of sending somebody like Rashida to Washington, D.C.
That's exciting. Can't wait to read that tomorrow. I've also been following some of your thoughts and remarks that had to do with the World Cup.
Yeah.
and what happened in France, and you were kind of pointing out, making some observations about what you were noticing with that celebration. What struck you about that?
You know, I've you know, being Arab and Muslim, you're automatically a soccer fan, right? You grow up being a soccer fan, so I've always been you know, a big time soccer fan, a big time sports fan. You know, and being an activist and also a legal scholar, I try to find the political dimensions of what you know, sports means.
So it was more than just sports. What happened?
Yeah. No, everything is political. Whether it's sports, whether it's dating, love, everything in my opinion is political. So yeah, there were a lot of like really compelling dimensions of the French team, given who the French soccer players were, and that pushed me to tweet about it and write some articles about that. Yeah.
It got picked up quite a bit. Very interesting. So you talked a little bit about this, but I'm curious, how did you first get involved with ISPU? How did that come about?
So I'm really, and I'm saying this not because I'm here and because I'm speaking for ISPU, but I really value the work that ISPU does because they provide empirical research statistics that scholars like myself find extremely invaluable. So whether it's writing about poverty in the United States, whether it's writing about racism within the Muslim American community, whether it's writing about Muslim American turnout during elections, primaries, and general elections, I don't have to conduct that research myself, which I can tell you as an academic takes a lot of time and also a lot of money. So the fact that ISPU can provide that research really enhances the work that I do, other academics do, and then I think drives the kind of activism that happens on the ground. So I first came to ISPU because I was citing their work. Second, I became close friends with Dalia Mugahid and so on. So it was a natural sort of collaboration that I work closely with ISPU as a scholar.
We're proud to have you as an ISPU scholar.
And I'm proud to be on.
And we're, you know, this year's banquet on Sunday, September 30th, it's going to be, our theme this year is Building Muslim Resilience. And wondering if you can give us a little, what's on your mind? What do you think you might be talking about that night? Yeah,
so I haven't read the speech yet. But I have some ideas. I was really inspired by what happened on Tuesday. You know, and I think that it's important for us to stay mindful of the positive things that are happening with Muslim Americans today. Obviously, you know, juxtaposed with all the negative stuff that's happening and coming out of this Trump moment. So I want to talk about, you know, what I call a Muslim American renaissance, right? We see it with the emergence of these really promising politicians. We see it with the resilient emergence of organizations on the ground responding to things like countering violent extremism, radicalization, the fact that we have more Muslim academics at really prestigious universities, the fact that we have, you know, Muslims addressing anti-Black racism in a serious way. So I think it's important to address, you know, these strides that are being made during a moment of crisis, which I consider, and I think it's safe to call it a renaissance of sorts.
Well, this is going to be good, and I know you're not going to want to miss it on Sunday, September 30th. Tickets are now on sale on our website, ISPU, and I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
Looking forward to hearing more from you, and I'll be following you on Twitter, and we'll see you on September 30th.
See you then.